got a lot to cover tonight. My name is Dodie Newman, and thank you all for being here tonight. And I'm looking forward to Scott's presentation. I'd like to introduce him, Scott Elser. He started his bonsai career a long time ago in high school as he pored over his grandfather's John Naka books. And I guess when you got out of college is when you officially started your bonsai career. He felt that bonsai was a natural marriage of his love of the outdoors and his graphic design background. Driven by his passion for native Northwest species, he began gathering trees from the wild to build his collection. Scott took his bonsai skills to another level and began studying with Boone, graduating from his 3-year intensive course in 2005. Armed with this in-depth instruction, he began entering trees into the US National Bonsai Show, winning Best Conifer in 2008 and 2010. You are a quick study. And Best of Show in 2012. His pursuit of bonsai as an artistic endeavor continued with Ryan Neal at Bonsai Mirai. In 2024, Scott won the Best Extra Large Conifer Award at the Pacific Bonsai Expo. If you didn't see his Doug fir, you missed a beautiful tree. Scott draws on his graphic design skills to create both Japanese and Northwest-inspired bonsai, both in deciduous and conifer trees. He regularly teaches and shares these skills throughout the Pacific Northwest. And I've had the pleasure of getting to see his program, and I promise you're going to get a lot of good information tonight, and he's a very clear speaker. So without further ado, Scott, take it away.
Well, welcome everybody. I haven't really done a Zoom presentation quite like this before to bonsai clubs. I do them regularly otherwise, but it's kind of nice to be here tonight and share some bonsai knowledge and hopefully give you some inspiration of what you can do with trees. And most of the things that we're going to talk about here tonight when we talk about air layering are about deciduous trees. You can apply these to conifers, but it's a little bit harder. Junipers work pretty well, but pines are pretty nigh impossible to do. When they're really young, you can do that. But most of the things you'll see, all of my examples certainly are all deciduous trees. So I have a PowerPoint style presentation to run through for you, but I thought that I would just show you the trees. Now in the PowerPoint, they're all deciduous without leaves, so it's very easy to see what's going on. But I have almost all of those trees in the presentation right here, so I thought I'd just show them to you. The first one I want to show you is the one over my shoulder right here. This is a Japanese maple, and it is an air layer. I could show you the base, but that might get kind of cumbersome. It has a perfect radial root system all the way around. But interestingly enough, it's the top of the air layer, but the bottom of the air layer is the shohin. So, and I'll explain that a little bit later. You can see this scar right here, maybe. That is where that tree occurred. So we'll show that a little bit later. Japanese maple. This is the standalone crabapple. You can see that I used air layering for shohin quite a bit. This one worked out very nice. This is the top of the tree, and I sold the bottom part of the tree. So I saved the most interesting part. This is a wood rose that was given to me by Andrew Robson. So it's a native tree here, and I shortened the trunk by about 2 or 3 inches by air layering it, and I just separated it this spring. It actually took me 2 years. That's why I wanted to show this one, is that the first year it didn't really take, and I redid it, and the second year it worked out perfect. This is an ilex that I wanted to make into a shohin. That was just, I shortened the trunk by about 1.5 inches, making me able to really kind of condense the tree down. It's a little bit weak right now. It just got repotted from the air layer. This is another one that took 2 years to take. But generally, like Japanese maples, they're an instant take. So they usually just take 1 year. but I'm going to let this one grow out a little bit before I cut it down to the shohin size. And then finally, I have a plum. Well, this was, Dodie mentioned my grandfather, and I studied his John Naka books. This is an air layer, and you can see where the cut was right here. And this was air layered last year, took only a single year, and this is the bottom, the base. And I had my grandfather's tree, this is his tree, for many years. He's been gone for 20 years, so I've had it that long and could never really quite make it into anything, could never really build up the health. And so I mentioned it to my friend Andrew Robson, and I said, you know, what if I cut it off here just like this that you see, and I make it into a shohin? He's like, well, why don't you just air layer it? And I thought, well, that's a great idea, because when I air layered it, I actually like the top better. So this is the top. And after I air layered it, I decided to make it into a cascade. It was not my original plan, but this is a plum. It's got really nice aged bark. It's obviously, you know, 30 or 40 years old. So it will make a very nice tree going forward. The reason I'm showing you this tree is when Dodie starts the presentation, you'll see it in flower this year and see what it looks like. But this is yet to be refined. I'm just letting it grow on. You can see the long extensions that I'm getting right here. I'm just letting it grow and rebuild those roots. When I originally separated it, it was last fall, and I put it into a temporary container without touching the roots at all. And then this spring, I actually repotted it again. So that's just within a few months. But this time I actually worked on the roots. So just a quick introduction of the trees that you'll see on the slides, just so you have some context. So Dodie, why don't we go ahead and start those slides and we'll talk about those.
Happily to do so. I did forget to mention to everybody, feel free to ask questions in the chat. They're a little harder for me to see when the presentation is being done, but I will catch up and ask all of them in due time. So we do want you to ask questions.
So I'm up here in Portland, Oregon. I'm just right off of I-5, so you can just kind of come straight up and you'll run into me pretty much. But we had a great spring day here today, perfect for growing trees. And yeah, so we'll get started here. So this is a picture of the plum that I just mentioned. I just showed you. You can see it's the same pot. You can see how when I tilted it over, it kind of raised the roots out of the pot a little bit. But I'm really looking for that kind of pendulous cascade look with the blossoms. Once I get things going, I'll probably take some of those top branches off and kind of work things from there. But you can see the bark is kind of old and aged and definitely worth saving. So we'll talk about air layering tonight. There we go. So what is air layering? So air layering is when we want to create roots on a tree where none existed before. And we'll talk about the cases where we'd want to do that. But basically we're shortening the trunk in some fashion, or we're making the tree into multiple pieces, but we're trying to put roots in a different location than where they naturally exist. So we have three reasons that we would air layer. One is for propagation. Now, I've never really done this. I don't propagate material this way. I'm usually using it for different purposes, but you can create different trees, and we'll go through this a little bit more, but creating new material from scratch. The reason that you might want to do that is just say you have a rare species or something that's been grafted or something, and you want to, you know, you can't really plant them from seeds or something like that, then air layering is one of the ways that you can propagate the trees. The second one is creating a new bonsai from an existing tree. So that's what I did with the crabapple that you saw. I air layered off the top, made a new tree, and then the bottom part was made into something different. And I've shown you two examples, the plum tree and the Japanese maple, that were actually made two great trees from one tree. And that maybe is the exception, but I was lucky enough to have some really great trees and kind of multiplied them and made them better. And then the third reason, which I really was actually attempting to do with this big Japanese maple behind me, was to improve the root base. I wasn't actually after the little shohin tree. That was my bonus. But using air layering to improve the nebari is probably my #1 use. All of the air layering that I have done has been with existing bonsai or trees that are already in pots. I haven't really done it out in the orchard or out in the garden or some other, or out in the wild. Everything has been in a pot, but I'll talk about those different things, different scenarios. So propagation, as you can see in this example, we want to create new material from landscape or nursery stock. It could be in the wild, it could be a tree in your yard, but we can air layer multiple locations on a tree. If you wanted to make a forest, let's say, you could air layer off different limbs of the tree and make a forest out of those separate pieces. So the purple that you see there represents the pots where the new roots are going to grow, and the yellow, of course, is the top of the tree. And like I said, you can do this from nursery stock. You can do it from something in your backyard. Interesting Japanese maple you have grown in your front yard. There are different things you can do. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that often if you have nursery stock that has been grafted, they may have grafted it to more easily propagate it, but many times, such as the case in Japanese maples, when you have dwarf or special varieties, that they are not as strong on their own roots, so that if you air layer them, they may perform a little bit weaker than the grafted plant that was grafted onto a generic species like the Japanese maples usually are. It may perform a little bit different, so just be a little bit careful with that, but you can use those. So the next one is creating a new tree from an existing tree to make a better one, or sometimes you get both that are turned into excellent trees. This example here was totally made up random. You can see the shohin tree easily in the top, but you can see that there are many places or opportunities to create a new tree from the bottom parts. But this is basically to create a new tree from the top. And I've seen people fight over the new tree that was created by air layering it off of another base. And then the final one is to improve the nebari. So say you have something that has a lopsided root base. Maybe you don't have any roots on one side, or they're not radially distributed the way that you would like. It has inverse taper maybe. There are many situations where using air layering will improve the nebari. So the important thing is to learn how this works. Why would the tree want to grow roots in a certain spot? And we're going to talk about the technique, and tonight I hope to do an example for you of how I use the technique to create something live. But we need to know how the tree is working to know how we can manipulate that into putting roots where we want. So we have water that flows upward through the xylem. That's the central core of the tree. That's where, so water is coming from the roots up out into the leaves, where it evaporates out of the leaves, translocates, and at the same time it brings nutrients up. The nutrients ride on that water column and go up out into the leaves, and then the leaves take and make energy, make sugars and starches by photosynthesizing. They take in carbon monoxide and use the sunlight and water to reprocess it into sugars for the trees, and it sends those down to the roots on the outside, which is the phloem, the outer layer. That's the blue layer that you see. So what we're going to do is we're going to interrupt that flow of the nutrients going down to the roots. We're going to stop that by wringing the bark, taking the bark off all the way around the base of the tree in whatever line or angle that you want. You can use this technique to change the angle of your tree, so you don't have to make it perfectly perpendicular to the existing trunk. You can change the angle, and we're going to wring the bark, remove it down past the cambium layer, which is the little thin green layer that you can see, and the tree is forced to make new roots if it wants to stay alive. So it's making all this energy. It has its leaves out. We'll talk about the timing on that. It has the leaves out, gathering energy, is sending it down to the roots, and we're going to interrupt that flow. So you can see when we do that and we set everything up, we're going to put soil in there, we're going to do some extra things. When we do that, the result is we get new roots at this cut location where we've cut into the tree. and hopefully they come out in a very radial manner. Now, in Japanese maples, that works very reliably. There are other trees, like I don't really grow Chinese elms, so I'm not even sure how well they work, but I've seen the results of different people. Even Dodie mentioned that she did it, and it it works very well for Chinese elms as far as I know. And I've done several crab apples, and we have many other deciduous trees that it works on very well. A lot of junipers have been used also. So here's case one, crabapple. Now you might recognize this as the small one. Actually, it's in the back now. I can't grab it. The small little shohin. And that's on the upper section. We'll show it. But this is what the tree looked like before I air layered it. And I had a little bit of dead trunk. You can see there where it's exfoliating on the bottom. I surmised that that was dead. I wasn't really quite sure, but it looked like it to me. So I kind of wanted to make it into a smaller tree. So here's the upper part. You can see where I have that little white zip tie there marking the place where I wanted to make the air layer at. So right in the upper canopy of the tree, and notice that it's when it's in full leaf. That's important for what we're doing. It's in full leaf. Next slide. So here it is. This is way back before we had these nice iPhones. It took great pictures, but luckily I documented this a little bit. And you can see my little contraption here of my pot and my support mechanism for the pot, even though it's a little bit blurry. And you can see that I actually made a big cut on it already. But here I am set up to make this air layer of this crabapple. On the interior, you can't really see very much of it. You can see a little bit. There is New Zealand sphagnum moss or orchid moss in the middle as a core that goes up right next to the ring around the bark. And the pot is suspended from the tree itself. I once actually did an air layer, actually it was the maple behind me, where I suspended the pot on chopstick stilts. And it worked, but not very elegantly, and I had to make sure that they didn't fall off. So tying the pot to the tree is the best way to go. So here's that crabapple. This is in a now Tokutaki pot. He's a good friend of mine here in Portland. And been growing it for quite a few years, and I'm starting to get some ramification on it. You can see it's got little spurs so it can start blooming and doing some things, but I'm very happy with the marriage of this pot and this tree, and it's turning into one of my favorites in the collection. So here's my grandfather's plum that I showed you earlier, and you can maybe see that there's not really a lot going on here in this tree. What's really interesting about this tree is I've owned it twice. So after my grandfather passed, I sold some of his trees. I had all of them pretty much, and I sold some of them off because I couldn't see what to make of them or what to do. And I sold this to a friend of mine named Ann Spencer, and she was the queen of Shohin bonsai. And some of you from California that have been around a while might recognize her from the Shohin convention because she was always going down to that. So she had it for a few years. And when she passed away, she gave it back to me. And so then it was in my care, but it kind of floundered, and I was struggling with how to keep it healthy, what to do with it. This is shortly after I got it back from her. And so I grew it for many years, but there's like, I need to do something different here. So this is last year. And you can see that I put it in a wood box to gain some health. You can see that the bark is kind of craggling up pretty nice and looking pretty cool, but the form is just kind of gangly and kind of grotesque and not really too exciting to me. So it's been many years later, but you can see I decided to air layer, and I thought, I better take some pictures. So I've already made a little saw cut, which you can see in that blue circle, that I'm ringing the bark, and you can see by that cut that I intended the planting angle to be different. I didn't cut it just straight across. So see, it's an angle. You can put any angle that you want. And so you can see here what I did to make that cut, and I've actually chewed into the wood quite a bit. And it's something to keep in mind when you do an air layer, that this is a pretty irreversible project. It's got to be successful in the fact that the tree may stay alive even if the roots fail, but it's going to be really ugly. So you want to make sure that you have everything set up right, and it's a species that you can be successful at. So the first thing you need to do when you make this cut is you need to determine what is your planting angle going to be. Is it going to be straight across, or do I need to change it? So then I take and make a shallow saw cut with a saw. I've got one right here. I'll show you later. Um, Make a saw cut around. That's the easiest way to do it. You don't have to use a saw. You could just use your knife. But then I use a knife to cut all the way up into that saw cut. So then I'm removing all the bark and woody tissue around it, and the height of that cut is roughly equal to the diameter of the uh, trunk or the branch that I'm air layering. So you can see here it makes kind of a squarish shape when you're ready to go. And one of the big questions that I get, I'm just going to preempt that. I was joking with Dodie because I did this presentation at the Bonsai Society of Portland last month, and I got this question 3 times, and it was like, did anybody listen to the answer? And that is, do I use a wire? And I have used, so that's a wire ring around that initial cut. And the reason for that is to keep the tree from jumping the track, so to speak, jumping over the area that you've cut and reconnecting, because if it reconnects, then it's not going to grow any new roots. So I have used a wire on things that are really tough to air layer, like beech, because I have had them jump over. I've had them jump over the wire. But I think the best way to solve that is to cut deeper into the wood and to elongate the length of the cut, the length of the bare area that you're making, and that will solve that problem. So I don't generally use a wire on anything that I do. I don't find that I need it. So the fourth thing to do is to apply a rooting hormone to the upper side of the cut. You don't need it anywhere else because that upper side of the cut is where the new roots are going to emanate from. So there are different kinds of rooting hormones. I have in the past, you can see some of these containers are quite old, and I have all 3 of them still. But like the root tone I've had since I started, so it's probably 30 years old. They come in a powdered form, or you can get a gel. The Clonex there is a rooting gel, and they all have the same ingredient in them, which is the indole-3 butyric acid. And it causes the cut site to callus, and once it's calloused or healed over, then it will produce roots. If it doesn't callus over, it's not going to produce roots. And sometimes you'll see that it has calloused over very well, maybe even grotesquely, but not produce roots. And in that case, we just re-wound the area, reapply the hormone, and usually it will take off the next season. So here we have the plum that we were just looking at. Here it is all potted up. So I used just a simple 4-inch crinkle pot here. And you can see that I used a piece of duct tape to hold it together. I don't recommend the duct tape except for maybe to help seal something up temporarily, because the duct tape will come apart in the sun. And you need to leave it up for a good 6 months. So it's better to wire the pot together, and I'll show you that in an example. So the plastic pot has the side slit, and then there's a hole in the bottom so that it can wrap around the trunk. And then we can secure it with wire or tape, and then you have to secure the pot so it can't move. So you'll see the wire at the top of the pot is wired directly to the trunk and the tree, and you have to just look for what the tree offers you for opportunity. Basically you're just supporting weight, but you don't want it to shift around at all. And in the inner core is sphagnum moss. You can see some of it poking up there. That is to keep everything moist. So after I put the rooting hormone on, I put sphagnum moss on, and then I fill the rest of the container up with regular bonsai soil of your choice. It's such a small amount. I like to use regular bonsai soil because I want the tree to grow into a soil that I can use directly into my new pot. I don't want to have to try and switch it out, like say using some potting soil that has peat or other organic material in there that I'll just have to take back out. So I like to use that coarse sphagnum moss, and then you can actually chop that up too. Just use a kitchen knife or something, a chef's knife, and chop it up so you don't have too long of strands that you have to pick apart later, untangle from the roots. But the rest is bonsai soil. So here you see a side view that can kind of show you how all of that works. I have my pot suspended usually from branches in the tree. I have my core, I have my section that I have removed of bark the ring of bark. You can see that clearly. It's the lightest shade there. And notice that I have it at a different angle. So the pot doesn't have to be at an angle. It just needs to make sure that that cut site, at least the top part of it, is right in the middle of the pot, as close to the middle of the pot as I can get. Because the biggest point of failure that I see in my experience is having that cut site too close to the top of the pot. In other words, it doesn't stay moist enough. I need to have that buried down. And you can see there's also the core of sphagnum moss, which is the kind of pinkish tan area around the trunk there, with regular bonsai soil on the outside. So we want to make sure that that cut that we make is centered in the middle, vertically in the middle of the pot. So here we see that same plum, and I've showed you the live here behind me, it's in leaf. We see these two pieces, and that I separated the this tree in September or something like that. So I let it go quite a ways, and I could see it was just busting out with roots. It did very, very well. So I immediately took off that plastic pot without messing with the roots and just put it into a bigger pot for the winter. Now, one of the big questions is when to separate, and we'll have another slide on that. But generally, if I have enough roots, I'm going to try and separate in the fall. It's just easier to deal with in the winter. But I don't have to worry about whether it's winter hardy, because it's all of those new roots, even if they're suspended in air, have been packed with all the nutrients that the tree has produced, so it's actually quite winter hardy. And you can see that on the right hand, you can see the initial, that was in a larger pot because it was a bigger tree, and you can see the cut behind there with the new top sticking up in front of it. Oh, so believe it or not, that is the tree behind me right there. And if you're looking closely at the bottom, you see I got this we have silent auctions at our club where, people bring in trees and you can bid on them. And sometimes they're from people that have passed away. Sometimes people just have too much material. I don't even really remember what this one was. I don't know who the owner was. But I recognize that this tree was an older Japanese maple, and that's why I bought it. It wasn't really the shape. It's just that its age was extreme, and so I just thought I'll take a chance on this. And so when I got to looking at it, it has this unsightly gap in the roots in the bottom that just make a fork. And I'm not the kind of person who wants to just put a rock in between it and call it good. I wanted to make it into a better tree, so I decided to air layer it, and I air layered it right below that first big branch, which is now the first branch that you can see back here. Right, there you go. That Dodie highlighted it there. I air layered it right below that point. And my goal was to make a better root base. That was the whole goal of this tree. I hadn't designed anything on it. It was just to make a better radial root pattern and get rid of that ugly forked root base. So here's what I'm talking about, just a drawing. So there's a great big gap between those two big roots. They were maybe the size of my thumb, each one. And so I decided to air layer it. Next slide. So I air layered it above that gap, and the result was that I got my new roots where I wanted them below the main branch. But also you'll see on the bottom left, that's where the shohin tree came from, as one of those two forks on the base. And it was able to sprout, and I could develop a shohin from that. So it had a very fantastic base. I actually ended up grafting a root on the back side of it to kind of fill it in. But other than that, it had a fabulous root base to work as a bonsai. So that's how I created two trees out of one, where the big tree was on top, which is quite unusual, and the small tree came from the bottom of the air layer. Oh, so here we have... I don't even have the original photo. This is just from a printout that I had. You can see here the separation, the setup that I had with this tree, with the just the plastic pot tied up with wire, and you can see how big the base was. Just lifting it off, you can see that I was much younger then. I didn't have much gray hair. And here's the root base that I ended up. You see this great radial roots coming out all over the place, and so I really ended up with fantastic roots, just what I'm looking for. And here was the tree this spring. So you can see that main branch going to the right, an air layer just below that, and you can kind of see how the base has really nice radial flare out. It's filled all out, it's filling in and doing nicely, and I've been able to style the rest of the tree. And actually, since I been working on it, I actually changed the front almost 180 degrees just a couple of years ago and redesigning it. So, and here's the base. You can see in the upper left where I started to grow it out, and it had some great taper and potential for a shohin. And the bottom photo is from it earlier this year. So it's developed nicely. It's kind of an odd shape, but I still really like it, and it was definitely worth the effort. You can see the striations in the bark telling you that it's of great age.
Scott, I do have a
Yeah,
question. This may be
yeah.
obvious. So this is the base of the root that was two roots. So do you cut one away? Is that
I
what you?
cut one. Yes, I cut one away, and it didn't seem like. I'm not sure what happened. It's been so long ago that it didn't sprout or it didn't have a shape that interested me. Whereas I think this one actually had roots around the base of it. It wasn't lopsided, so it made more sense to use it as a shohin. Oh, and you can see before we go, you can see it in the upper photo a little bit easier, but you can see that nice diagonal cut there. That was where it was separated from the main tree. And so it's taken me quite a while to heal that over. So there's kind of explaining where things come from and what they look like. So quite a dramatic change in a few years. So ground layering, this is the ilex that I just showed you. So what I'm calling ground layering, some people call something else. So I can't remember what they called it. Anyway, so this is where I'm not actually suspending a pot. I'm just building sidewalls onto the existing pot because I'm not changing the height that much. Or, I want to improve the nebari, but I'm actually just going above the existing nebari. In this case, I only wanted to change the height a couple of inches. So I just added this plastic sidewall around. I just took like a gallon container or something similar, cut off the bottom, got the sides that I wanted, the height that I wanted, and stuck it in the pot. And then you use these aluminum wire clips to fasten it into place and hold it. And I did the same thing with the sphagnum moss core and regular bonsai soil on the outside. The unfortunate thing was that this one took 2 years, which I lost a little bit of time there, but it worked, and it's on its way now. Oh, so as you grow this new tree and you separate it, you'll often have very fine roots. Like the tree behind me was actually a pretty tall tree, the Japanese maple, and it was a pretty tall tree and only had spindly roots. And so you don't really want to use those to anchor the tree down. So one of the things that you can do is to create some wooden roots or use a piece of plywood that you can screw into the base of the tree that you can then wire down into the pot to support it while it's still growing these new roots. Now, one of the big things that you want to do is to make sure that you drill a pilot hole before you put any screws in, because you don't want to split that trunk open and ruin your hard work. But that works very well for securing new air layers into the pot, at least for the first year or two, and then it's going to be fine after that, after it grows, those new roots grow out and thicken up. Conifers. Now I mentioned that things like pine trees are pretty much impossible, but you can do junipers and you can do other things. But the thing that you really need when you do a conifer is you have to realize that the tree has to support itself for a while. And for a conifer to do that, it really needs to have a live branch below the air layer site. So you can see that here. I have got two, one on each side. That's ideal, but that will help the tree produce nutrition for the roots. So those ones that you see in the illustration, the energy that it produces is going down to feed the roots in the pot, whereas the foliage above the tree is used to make the new roots that you're trying to make. So you have two systems going at once, so to speak. And conifer really needs that to overcome that loss of nutrition flowing down. Hopefully that makes sense. So you may need 2 years. I remember when I was studying with Boone, somebody had done a Hinoki cypress, and I saw all the roots when they uncovered it. He says, "Nope, cover it back up and let's go another year." So you have to be able to sustain the tree for 2 years to make sure. I I saw a video. I won't mention his name. I don't know his personal name, but his site. But it was a guy in Greece who is or close to that European country that was did an air layer of a nursery stock black pine, and it took him 4 years. And when he cut it, it was like, well, I could have had a better tree in 2 years from seed than what you got in 4 years. So it can take a long time with conifers, so make sure that's what you want to do. But like I said, junipers are a great subject to think about for doing air layers. Maybe you can think about it this way, and we can go to the next slide. Is it anything that you can graft really well? Well, that doesn't work with pines because pines are easy to graft too. But things that produce callus tissue are going to be able to be air layered more. So the best time to do air layer is right now, after the leaves have hardened off. Now your timing where you are, whether you're Northern California, Southern California, I'm up here in Oregon, Northern Oregon, Washington, the leaves usually harden off. In other words, they become tougher, the color changes to a darker color. That's usually in the month of May. That means that the leaves have matured and now are capable of putting energy back into the system. Before that, they were a drain on the system. The tree was using its energy to make those leaves, but now those leaves have hardened off and they're ready to contribute back to the tree and sending nutrients down. And so that's critical for making new roots. So that's a really great time. I would say any time from April all the way up until June is great. When you start to get into July, then you have to have enough time to reproduce those roots. And so you may not have enough time, and the weather may not be ideal. We probably want to be able to protect your tree from the summer heat if you're doing it later on. And then you have to be able to monitor the moisture level in the tree. I usually just water the air layer itself, so the water's constantly going into that, and whatever trickles down from that into the pot, I'm able to is able to water the tree plenty. So I probably lean on the water a bit more when I'm doing an air layer, knowing that I'm not really trying to preserve those lower roots anyway too much. They're on their way out usually, unless I'm going to keep the bottom part of the tree. So I'm not quite as concerned. But you need to be able to check the moisture level. Now, when I say weekly, maybe you're doing an air layer that's in a neighbor's tree and you can't go over every day 10 feet in the tree to check it, right? Maybe that's what you're doing. I have a friend, Bob Laws, who air layered an Gravenstein apple that was maybe close to a foot in diameter, 10, 12 inches in diameter, and it's now in the Pacific Bonsai Museum. But he successfully air layered a very large apple, but that was an apple tree in his backyard. So he could, but it was way up in the air. He had to get on a ladder to monitor that and make it work. But that was a species that easily air layers, so he made it successful.
Well,
Oh, question?
I have a lot of questions, but one of them that's pertinent to what you were just asking. So the watering, does it differ? The watering needs differ as the air layer advances? Does it need more water to start than it did 4 or 5 months later when it has some roots, or about the same?
I've never noticed any difference, and it's really hard to monitor the water in the air layer. I mean, you can kind of pick at it, but and check the moisture level, so you don't want it to dry out, that's for sure. But the moss that is in there helps keep that site very moist. And so, as long as that moss is staying moist, I don't need a lot of water in the rest of it. So the rest of it could dry out a hair as long as that moss is staying moist.
Okay, so somebody was asking, and I think you've answered their question, how do you keep the soil moist? It's basically the moss is what it is and watering it frequently.
Right. And so if you're air layering something that's in the neighbor's tree, you may want to use something like a syringe or something to insert water into the system. A lot of times people will use plastic wrapped around each side of it. So maybe they leave the top end a little bit loose and the bottom is really tight. So the moisture and the soil and everything stay in. In those cases, they're usually not even using bonsai soil. They're just using plain moss. And that's what people that are, say, propagating junipers for grafting or something like that, they often do that, just use some moss because it takes very little to get the junipers to take. Um, but there are different ways depending on what you're doing. Since I'm usually air layering bonsai, I just incorporate it into my regular watering and water it as usual. So which species? We've talked about this. High water mobility species such as maples and fruiting trees, crabapples, plums, shrubs, those trees tend to work very well. Things that like a lot of moisture, they produce a lot of growth. They tend to want to air layer. Shrubs, they often do that on their own, running across the ground. We talked about conifers a little bit, having that one branch at least below the air layer, and it may take a couple of years. Junipers, hinoki cypress, or different kinds of cypress work pretty well. Pines are pretty tough. I don't know of anybody who has really air layered an elongating species such as a spruce, fir, or hemlock. Maybe I should try that sometime since I really do a lot of work with those trees. I just haven't had the need to do that. And again, pines are kind of difficult, if not impossible, to root. Easy to
I do
graft.
have several species-specific questions I've been holding on
Sure,
to. Someone
sure.
asked about coastal redwoods.
That's a good one because I was thinking about that. Since you can basically make those a big cutting when they're collected, they just cut them off at the bottom and they root, putting them in sand. I think that they would air layer fairly easily, but I don't have any experience with that to prove that.
And what about contorted hawthorn?
So hawthorns, I'm not really sure. They tend to be a little bit lower water mobility, and I would say give it a try. I think you have a good chance of success. If it's a really precious specimen, maybe not. But I think that you would have some good chances of success with hawthorn. They are a species that, for me, the ones that I have, and I have several. I have one of my grandfather's actually, and it's kind of funny because I have a hawthorn in a hagedorn, a Michael Hagedorn pot. So that kind of goes hand in hand. But it doesn't heal over very well, so that makes me a little bit leery about whether it would. It doesn't callus over wounds very well, so it makes me leery about how well it would actually produce roots in an air layer situation. So some of these I would, if you're unsure, like I have a lot of success with some of these, and the other ones I don't have any experience with. It might be worth Googling to see if somebody else has done it successfully.
How about ginkgos?
I have no idea on a ginkgo, but I have my doubts because they're another species that do not heal over very well.
Good. Okay.
In other words, healing over is producing callus tissue. So if they can't produce callus tissue on a branch cut, then it's less likely they're going to do it in an air layer cut, if that makes sense. And I'm just kind of hypothesizing there. I can't prove that. I haven't done enough of them. Oh, that's it for
That's
slides.
it. I do have some more questions.
Great.
Um, someone was asking if the rooting hormone is it optional for Japanese maples?
The rooting hormone would be optional, but if I was going through all that work, I would recommend using the rooting hormone to guarantee your success. But if there was one tree that I would think it would be optional, it would be a Japanese maple. If you have a powder like this, you can take that powder and just in a separate container, take a little bit, mix a little bit of water, and make it into a little bit of a paste and spread that on the cut site. So that'll make it stick to it a little bit better. I prefer to use this gel just because I have it. And it goes on very easy. I just paint it on with a brush. And we'll do that in a little bit.
Okay. Someone asked, can you do air layer multiple times on one branch? I guess.
So that's an interesting question. And if you have branches in between, then that might work. But I think if you do separate branches on this feeding into the same trunk, I think you're going to have success doing. So in other words, they're spread out as the picture that I showed, you like one, two, three. But if you're stacking them one on top of each other, I'm not sure that that would work. It's like maybe the first one would work and the second one wouldn't, or vice versa. Um, but if it's just raw stock and you can try it, then give it a try. But you may, both of them may fail or both of them may work. I don't really have any experience of trying to do that for propagation.
So another person had a question about if you're restarting an air layer that only produced a large callus after the first year, um, should you keep the large callus bulge and simply expose the live tissue in the callus or completely recut the whole thing?
So what I would do, well, I would definitely leave the roots that you have. You might actually even cut them back. But say the callus makes a big bulge like this, and above here is the trunk, right? I would definitely cut this bottom side, leave this flare here because you want the roots to flare out. Recut the bottom side and reapply the wound, and you might even put a wire or something down around there to make sure that the roots flare out at that point. But yeah, just re-ruin the whole thing would be your best bet.
And a person who's a beginner, it's hard to know how deep to go. Is it better to err on the side of going deeper, short of cutting the tree in half? Um,
That's a great question. So I think that I was going to show that a little later, but
okay.
it's better to go a little deeper than not deep enough. If you don't go deep enough, it's just going to heal over. Now, I watched a video of Daisaku Nomoto. Some of you know him as a Shohin guy that comes here to the States. He's been around the Bay Area a long time. He uses show it right there, a knob cutter to chew into the tissue, the woody tissue. So he goes quite a ways. And so like there's definitely no return on that tree. He's on a one-way trip to making that air layer. But he definitely goes deep to make sure that it's not going to heal over.
There's a question. What do you think of the plastic ball type things that they sell? You snap around the cut.
I think those are a cool idea. I actually forgot. I have a couple that I have not tried. I was going to bring them in to show people. So what they're talking about is a spherical container. So you have two halves. They're actually fit like this, so they're opposite. The same thing. So they click together, and you can zip tie them together, and then they make a nice little pot. And they only work to something maybe up to an inch or maybe even less in diameter. And they are great for when you want to do something in a tree rather than trying to wrap plastic around it. You can just snap that on and fill it with soil or moss or whatever you want to do. And I think they're great. I just haven't had the opportunity to actually try one out. But for bonsai, I just say for bonsai, I definitely, and I'll show this one a little bit, I definitely like to make my own little container, my own little pot. And this one you can see it comes apart right here in the middle, it's split, and then I have a hole in the bottom that goes around the trunk. I put it together, I wire it together right here and right here. That's going to be a lot safer. And then I have little holes in here so that I can suspend the pot with wire. Then when I want to separate it, I cut across the bottom and I can set it right on the bench and I don't have to do anything. If you use one of those clamshell containers that we just talked about, or you use plastic, you then have to repot the tree somehow. You have to take that container off, and doesn't mean you have to untangle the roots, but you have to do something with it. With this way, I can separate it in the fall and not have to touch it again until the spring.
That's it. And of course, you make all those holes ahead of time.
Yes, that's what I did, especially for the. I don't usually do it when I'm sitting in my shop workshop, which is just my garage. I usually make them on the fly, but for this presentation, I wanted to make sure that I had it all ready to go.
Someone asked about, do you change your fertilizing strategy for a tree that's being air layered? And have you seen any improvement in success by adding foliar feeding?
I don't use foliar feeding on anything. I don't think it really does a lot or makes a big enough difference to spend my time doing that. But I do use, at the current time, I use a combination of liquid fertilizers and some solid, like BioGold. I tend to do the solid, especially in the fall. If I had a bigger budget or more access or more time, I might do the solid even more, making my own. I've had good success doing that, but right now I just use liquid. So when I'm using the liquid fertilizer, and I'm doing it like once a week right now, just fish emulsion and sometimes a little bit of Miracle Grow or Fox Farm or something that's actually a chemical fertilizer. I'll just water that right in the air layer and give it some nutrition.
Someone asked about, can you use an old medium-sized water bottle? I'm assuming for the container.
You can use anything that will hold soil in a rigid manner. I want it to be rigid so that again I can set it down on the bench when I'm done, and so that's what I would like. But you can use anything that will hold moss or soil or anything around the area that you want to air layer. I do prefer to have something opaque, um, especially if I'm using the plastic. Like most, any kind of pot like this is automatically going to be opaque. But if I was air layering up in a tree and I was going to use plastic, I'd prefer to have black plastic as opposed to clear. But any, you know, uh, a bread wrapper or something might work if you don't have anything else.
Ray's timing is perfect. He just asked, is there any difference between a clear versus opaque container? Just as you started answering it.
Yeah. And
So you
I
got that.
can't really speak from experience of that one is better than the other. Some people say that the roots don't like light, so that means they might kind of air prune themselves, but actually in the air layer situation, I want as many roots as I can get. I want it to pack out the container. So
Another question was, in your ground layer example shows a tree that's in dormancy. Is there any risk with applying the technique while the tree is dormant? Because you said do it and it's leafed out.
right, I think you're going to have more immediate success if you do it when the tree is leafed out. Is there any danger? Um, I don't think so, but I'd rather have the tree ramped up and fully moving resources before I do that. Um, but I think that I have done some things like that in the past while I'm repotting or doing something like that. I have repotted and done an air layer at the same time, but that's kind of a risky move.
It, well, the roots may not grow I mean, they don't grow till spring maybe, right?
Right.
So they're just sitting there. Someone asked if you would show your air layer pot again.
Oh, I was going to use it in an example, but yes.
Yeah.
So you can see you can see my hand. It's not very big. It just happened to be sitting right close to where my tree was. Like, well, that's just the perfect size. So it splits in the middle, so I can pull it apart, and then I have a hole down there. You can see the split goes all the way through. There happen to be four little holes inside, so I just clipped out the middle there. Sometimes I have to work a lot harder at that center hole. And then when I put this together, I'll stitch this together with wire in these two places so it holds firm together. And then these holes that you can see around the edge, they're for suspending the tree up. Now, in my example, what I'm hoping to do is actually set the pot on another branch that's out there to support it, make it nice and firm.
Okay, I'm going to read the next question. If the material being air layered is going to need a big trunk chop as its next step, would you consider doing that before applying the air layer? Or would you perform the air layer, let the tree recover, then proceed with the trunk chop?
Uh, well, it depends on whether I have existing branches below the trunk, the proposed trunk chop that are going to be the new tree. Um, so if if you don't have any branches that are going to be a part of the air layer that are below that trunk chop, what that means is you're just going to have a bare trunk. So you don't want to do uh, if you do the trunk chop before that, all of your new branches may be below where you want to air layer it, so you're going to end up with nothing. So you almost forced to do it afterwards, and that means that you probably want to get 2 years of growth. You know, you have the air layer year, and you have a whole nother year of growing before you would ever make that big trunk chop. But if you do have existing branches that you're just going to shorten the tree down, but have the new branches be a part of the air layer, then I would definitely do it after the air layer. You could even do them, well, it'd be hard to do them concurrently. It depends on how much foliage is above um, that trunk chop, if it's live or not. So just a tricky kind of case by case scenario on that one.
Well, Nick said he got it.
Okay.
You gave the typical bonsai answer. It
Yeah,
depends.
yeah, yeah. So you
So,
do have to look at how is the tree moving resources and what's going to happen when I do this and what are the ramifications and kind of figure some things out from there. It can be a little tricky.
good. I think we're caught up on questions. If I didn't ask your question, please resubmit it to me, but I think I've caught up.
Cool. Okay, well, next we're going to work on this little tree here. And I'm going to switch cameras here in a second so you can see easier what I'm working on. So this is a black hawthorn that was collected from the wild up on Mount Hood about 2 years ago with my friend Andrew, who I mentioned earlier. And you can see it's got severe inverse taper here. I'm kind of showing you what my plans are, is to make it kind of a cascade, Shohin-ish size tree. Now, we don't even know if this black hawthorn, you can see these big leaves that have grown out, whether that will make a great bonsai or not. So, but I don't really have much to lose on this specimen. The species is brand new, so to speak. There's a few people that have been working on it locally, but they grow into quite big trees. They love water, so that tells me that's probably going to do well. Andrew collected some larger ones, and he cut off roots that were 2 inches in diameter because the trunk was this big, you know, and he cut these big roots off when we collected them, and he put them on a heat bed, and they sprouted roots and they sprouted buds, foliar buds, and so it could take a big hit. So that tells me that I have a good chance of success. So you can see one of the techniques I use sometimes is a little zip tie to tell me that I want to do something with this. A lot of times the blue for me is to don't prune this branch, and a yellow is to prune this branch. Like this time of year when I do partial defoliation and pruning, I can't always see the whole canopy of what I had planned on, and so I use zip ties to tell me. So this zip tie is telling me I want to make an air layer on this tree right here. So that's what we're going to work on. So I'm going to switch cameras here. Hopefully it's not going to go dark on
I
me.
wonder what happens with the spotlight. We'll see. Oh,
There
it
we go.
works. Perfect.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little close-up view. That's nice as I have this camera, I can move it around a little bit if I get some slack. There you can see what that looks like. There's a little bit of dead stuff right there. So we don't know if it'll produce roots there, but you can see we got quite a nice drop in angle for a cascade. So my first thing is I'm going to determine where I'm going to make my cut. And so I have a little piece of chalk here. I might use a Sharpie or something like that, but I'm going to make the cut right here. And I'm pretty much going to go straight across, knowing that it's probably going to give me roots all over the place. The plum, when I did it this last year, it gave me roots above the cut site. So that was quite interesting. So I have my mark here. Hopefully you can see that just as a guideline of where I'm going to
Okay.
cut.
Yeah.
And so I'm using my trusty saw here, just
Mm.
a good old Joshua Roth. I ruined my last one by trying to cut some fiberglass rod
Uh-oh.
for bonsai, but so I don't need to go very deep, but I do need to make sure that I'm cutting through bark, and I can usually tell because instead of having dark, I see the light color of wood. And it's,
John Kim said, nice saw.
yeah, I said that just for you, John. Nice that you're here. I'm glad you're here. And it is the same saw that I had before that I replaced it with because I liked it so much. So that's all I need to do is ring this. Now I will probably clean this up with my knife when I'm done, but this gets me started. And actually that's the way that I make dead wood. I'm taking this wire off because it's just going to be in the way of everything that I do. It was supporting the tree as it was recuperating.
Someone did ask if they could have a copy of your presentation, and this is being filmed, and it will be on the the GSBF YouTube channel in the next week or two. So the presentation will be in there.
And it's unlikely that I'll release that just as a PDF as I
Yeah,
sent it.
yeah,
Someone else has asked that for a presentation also that saw
yeah.
it in Portland. They zoomed. We do our Portland meetings on Zoom also. So we've got that out, and I'm going to take this off the zip tie. I've got my handy knife here. So this is just a flex cut. This is a whittling knife or a chip knife. I can get a lot of torque when I'm trying to do things with this because it's got this short little tip. You could use a grafting knife, but anytime I'm carving a lot, I don't want to ruin my grafting knife. So that's why I'm using this. The bottom line that I'm making, it doesn't really matter what the bottom line is and what it looks like. I don't need to make another saw cut there. So I'll show you just as I'm getting started here. You can see I'm making a nice deep cut in there. I'm taking out a lot of wood as I work around that.
Probably
So,
not possible to move the camera to closer to your computer. Probably not, because we're
so I'm almost there on this part. So I'm taking off some pretty good shavings as I go. So you can see by the diameter of this part right here and the diameter that I ended up with right here that I'm actually have removed quite a bit of material. So I'll just give you a little bit of a close-up there so you can see what the cut looks like all the way around.
that's great.
So my next step is going to clean up the bottom just a little bit. It's a little bit ragged, so I'm just taking my knife, cleaning up the edge.
Are you saying the bottom of the top edge, you mean?
Yeah, the bottom of the top edge.
Okay.
So I have a nice clean cut where I want the roots to come from. So I've done a couple in the past, done one almost every year for the last 15 years, 10 or 15 years. So um, the basic technique has not really changed, but refinements. The saw makes things a little easier. Using this knife, I was very careful before and I didn't remove enough of the cambium layer. I was being real cautious because I didn't know how much I could remove, and now I realize I can remove a heck of a lot and not worry about it too much. So I'm going to use a little bit of this Clonex on my cut. Actually, before I do that, and I should have done this first, now that I have everything removed, I can see my problem I'm going to have already. So I'm trying out my pot. It goes around, but now I'm cutting in, I'm hitting the branch right here.
Yeah.
So it didn't quite enough light in there. So now, I hadn't planned on that. Can I move the pot a little bit to adjust, but I'm going to have to cut out for that, which is fine. So I tend to, I can make it work. It'll be easier if I do it here. So I'm just using my scissors to adjust that a little bit. And you can be very generous here because you can fill the gaps with the sphagnum moss. You don't have to worry about it being super tight. I am running the risk here of it rooting that branch, but I'm not too worried about that. Hey, that will work. One more little adjustment and we're ready to go. So having something that's fairly flexible helps. And this is a pretty flimsy pot, so I actually kind of like that. But it's going to be firm enough when I get it on the tree, get it full of soil, get it wired up. It's going to work great.
Is there a time frame where it's important to go ahead and get that fresh um, exposed wood within the sphagnum moss?
I've never worried about it too much. You can see that it's changing color already,
Yeah.
getting exposed to oxygen, but I've not worried about it too much, especially since I want it to heal over. Anyway, okay. You can use any kind of a brush, but I'm just using the cheap shop brush here with my Clonex, and this is a really dark color. So I'm just applying it to the bottom edge of the top cut. And I'm being generous, but not so much that it really drips down too much. So I only need a little bit for such a small little tree. And that's all I need. That's just a little bit of rooting hormone, which is really just an acid that's helping it callus. It has to produce that callus in order to be successful. So now I have my sphagnum moss, and I actually have a little bit of raffia here to help tie the moss on temporarily. I have the raffia so that it will rot away, possibly at least, as I'm going along. And so the sphagnum moss is just what you're used to using as top dressing. I just left it long without shredding it. Hopefully you use this as top dressing. So it's a New Zealand sphagnum moss.
Okay.
You could use anything, but I find that this works really good. I'll get me a piece of raffia ready. And this is already pre-moistened. And what I want to do is I want to compress this moss on nice and tight. I don't want it to be real loose. Otherwise, it's not going to provide a stable enough environment for the roots. And since this is a fairly small air layer, at least for me, it's a little bit tight in here, but it actually makes it easy to handle. When I did the demonstration for BSOP, the tree was almost 4 feet tall and larger diameter. So this is working very nicely.
Yeah.
here. This is like ideal. It makes it look like I know what I'm doing. It's always fun. And that's just keeping things in place until I get my soil in there. That's all I need it to do.
And that's all the moss you need.
Yeah, I'm just getting a layer to keep it moist around that cut site.
Okay.
That's all I'm really doing. So I have to, this is going down a ways, but I don't really need it down there. It just provides a little bit of a reservoir for moisture. But I'll give you a little bit closer look there.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. There we go. That's a little better. So now I can put my pot around here. As I'm flicking moss onto my keyboard and everything.
Not necessarily an indoor activity, huh?
Yeah. It's a little bit harder with this moss. Oh, that's because I'm... There we go. Okay, we're getting there. Something had to work not quite right. Okay. Here we've got the pot around their base now. So let me shine down inside so you can kind of see what I'm doing.
Oh, look at that.
Okay.
That's
So
great.
now I've got to stitch up this pot before I do anything else. So I've got some nice fine wire here. Practice my surgical skills. Some nice fine aluminum wire. And it's going to be easier if I go from the outside, the inside out. So I just made a U shape, a U shape with the wire and feed it through both holes. So you can see that maybe right in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I'm just going to tighten that guy up. Okay, it's not going in. It's wrapping it around that branch has kind of solidified everything already. But I'm going to, just for the sake of showing you what I'm doing, I'm going to take this old wire and I'm going to go right through this hole here, tie it off, and then go on to the branch right here to support the pot. And it doesn't take much. There's not a lot of weight on this, but there will be. So that gives me, I have the support of the branch right here, and I have the support of this wire right here. And there's not really another good place to anchor, although yeah, I'll just go with that. And I have an open spot here that I'm going to plug with sphagnum moss where I wrap the pot around the branch. I don't know if you noticed, but the shape was kind of like a diamond shape.
Mm-hmm.
And so and the branch is round, so it left a little bit of a gap there that I want to plug up. So now I can fill this with soil. And I just have some leftover soil, but it happens to be basically your boon mix of 1 part lava, 1 part akadama, and 1 part pumice. And it's of a kind of a medium size. It's not very big. This is a small tree. You can see that in there. If I was just doing it from scratch, I would probably just use 50-50 pumice and akadama. But I just happen to have this. So I'm just going to pour this in. And you know, I didn't even bring a chopstick in here. Oh, I have one. I have one. I'm going to get a little bit falling through because I didn't plug there's some 3/8 inch holes on the bottom that I didn't really plug up. But I'm going to make sure that I fill this up quite a bit here with my soil. And I'm not really top dressing this because I'm not trying to encourage the roots on the top like you would in a bonsai pot. I'm not. This is not a thin pot. And there's no roots to worry about damaging right now. So I'm just tucking this in around everything, especially where I have that branch that's cutting through. So you can
So
see.
do you place it on the bench where you normally would keep this tree, or do you
Yeah,
have it for shade?
I put it right where I put everything else.
Okay.
There's nothing else happening, you know, as far as I'm concerned. Just a normal tree. But I am trying to get that as filled up as much as I can so I have as much moisture in here as I can get. And that's pretty much it. It's ready to go, ready for water. I would water it thoroughly, maybe once or twice to make sure it's totally saturated. So you
That's
can
pretty
see the
nifty.
air layer site, the cut site is well buried inside the pot. You can't see where it is anymore.
We're getting some very positive comments. Excellent demonstration, awesome
Good,
demo, love this.
good.
I do have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Someone asked about a wisteria in the ground. Could you air layer wisteria that's in the ground? Not for a
Uh,
bonsai, but
well, you could air layer anything. It depends on the diameter and you know will it air layer up to that size. You know, some trees will air layer at a small size, but not at a larger one. And I told you about that apple tree that my friend Bob did. That's you know a good foot in diameter, and that's you know in a temperate climate. It's not a tropical species, but it's going to vary a lot. So um, wisteria, I would try and Google it and see if anybody has done them. I've not really done a wisteria, but a vine like that, I would think that it would do that. So it doesn't matter whether it's in the ground or in a pot. It's just a matter of how strong is it and what is the size that you're trying to air layer.
and someone asked about if you were doing a large branch on a landscape tree, um, and there's a lot of foliage on the air layer that you don't need. Can you cut like 80% of it off?
Can you repeat
Uh,
that? Sorry.
Yeah, I've got to find the question. It's hard for me to.
Just make sure I
Uh,
get it precise.
yeah. Sorry, it's hard. Didn't want to move up. I'll read it. If air layering a large branch off of a landscape trident maple, if we don't need 80% of the foliage, can we just remove all the unnecessary foliage when separating in the fall?
I think so. I think so. Um, if It depends on the air layer, but you may want the foliage to help grow new roots the next season. But if it's a really excessive amount, then no, you don't need that. In fact, I might do that ahead of time. If you have a lot of foliage, I might remove some of that excess before you know, while you're even doing the air layer. If you know the tree is going to grow really strong, which a trident likely is, that season, it'll produce enough energy to make new roots.
Okay, that's great. John mentioned Bill Valvanis, air layers, everything. You made it, the demonstration and your presentation so clear step by step.
No questions.
You know,
Except when you go to try and do it.
that's
But
what I was getting ready to say.
yeah,
It's more
but I
difficult.
encourage everybody to give it a try, especially if you're trying to improve the root base on a tree that you have, or you just see a better tree in the top of something than what you have in the whole tree. Those are the two really big cases where I would think about air layering.
Is it possible to overwater an air layer area?
It's possible to overwater anything, but since you're doing it in the summer and it's has a lot of airflow around it, it's not sitting on a bench and it's suspended, and usually the pot is deeper, like this one here. Um, the pot has a it's not a shallow bonsai pot, so to speak, for its proportions. By the way, this pot is about as small as I would want to get by with, but at least I can take it directly into a bonsai pot when I separate it. But since the column is deeper, the pot is deeper, I don't think that overwatering is really a problem.
I don't know how to say this plant. It said, have you ever tried a Fomina? Foemina?
Effeminate juniper,
Oh, see.
no.
Okay.
But
John,
it's in the juniper family. It should air layer
okay.
fine.
John Kim said pro level camera work.
Actually, the
Uh,
first time I did that.
it's worked out well.
Yeah.
Uh, do you need to keep the air layer pot moist all the time? The answer is yes, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. If you let it dry out, then you're toast.
yeah.
But
Um,
moist is different than wet. So you need to keep it moist, but not soaking wet.
not drenched. What would be the soonest that you would do major root work and flattening the roots out readily after separating in the fall?
Uh, well, I would never do that until the springtime when it's regular repotting season. And as I mentioned with this plum, it produced so many roots that I was able to rework them in the spring after the fall separation. It
Okay.
was kind of two-stage. I separated it and then I put it in a bigger pot because it had so many roots. And then in the fall, I could actually repot it into the cascade form into the bonsai pot. The funny thing is that I I had roots growing out above the cut site that were extremely large. So I pruned all of those off, getting ready to make a nice even uh, root base. And then I decided to turn it over and
Oh
make it
no.
into a cascade. So I cut off the very roots that I would have wanted to keep. But that's the way it happens. But I figured it was in the root developing mode, and so I wasn't really going to worry about it, that it was going to grow new roots everywhere. And I still had roots all the way around it, so I wasn't worried about
Someone asked where we can get your awesome shirt you're wearing.
it. Well, from me, you could send me an email. I have more. I have
Do you
more
sell them?
designs. They were at the Pacific Bonsai Expo, but unfortunately, I don't have a website.
Oh. Uh, is it okay if I give out your email if
Sure. If
people
anybody
ask?
wants to send me a note, and I have a bunch of different designs. I actually need to make up a flyer, but I have stock in all sizes, about 6 or 7 designs. Oh, here's the cool one. I have it. Now we're off topic. You did it, Carmen. So this is my.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. So do you see
Wow.
what it is? That's the big thing. So I'll just tell you, it's a skull.
Well, that's what somebody just wrote. The skull tree is my favorite.
Yeah. So I have one with Sasquatch too, but this was you just might find the design, since I do design work, the process interesting. This is my original sketch for that. They had like tools. Those are tools, pruners. John would like that sketched in.
Yeah.
And then this was my kind of proof of concept where I just kind of roughed it out. And then I did a final drawing.
Can you
But
show the final again? And did you draw this final?
oops. Yeah, all hand drawn. That's
That
the only
is
way to get
cool.
what you want.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So I don't have any others handy right now.
Well, back on topic, somebody asked if you have experience with Aor-layering and ume.
No, but I think I would stay as far away from that as I could get. Just
Oh, why's
because
that?
they're like the plum, but they're so particular. Unless I was an expert at it, plums or ume, I wouldn't try it. Well, they're unknown to me, but they seem to be so finicky and weak that maybe a young one, but that's up to you. It should kind of work, but I just can't guarantee it. So would I take an old specimen and air layer it to make the roots better? No, I wouldn't.
Okay. Lots of people are liking the shirts and the designs.
Oh, thanks. This is
You
the
can have a little side hustle.
yeah, my little crosscut
Oh,
design
that's
here.
cool. That's so
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, you need to create a website
yeah, I do.
in your
So my
spare
wife gave
time.
me the biggest concept, compliment, and that she didn't realize it was a tree right away.
Oh,
Of course, I'm the person that, if we're watching a movie, I will see a bonsai in the background of the movie, and she doesn't notice it.
here's the question. If I use a bigger branch, will I get a better bonsai starter? What is the maximum diameter I can use for air layering from landscape?
So the maximum diameter is going to depend on the species. So some of the easy species that we talked about, like uh, Japanese maple and crab apples, you might be able to get away with a couple of inches in diameter pretty easily. Bigger than that might be a bit tougher. The crab apples, I know you can get, 4 or 5 inches. Um, I think somebody maybe asked about a hawthorn, but I know that Isley Nursery did, like a big 6 or 8 inch uh, air layer on a hawthorn. But, they're horticultural experts, so they really know what they're doing. But it was possible. What was the first part of that question?
Uh, if you get a bigger branch, are you going to end up with a better bonsai to get yourself started?
Um, Not necessarily. So what you're after is you're after movement. And I want to show you that because it's a really great principle. So this is the ilex that I talked about earlier. And you'll notice that I mentioned that I wanted to make it into shohin. So what do I need for a good shohin? I need movement down low. And so the question is, how many changes of direction does it make in the amount of space? So this distance never changes on the tree, right? The diameter may change, but this distance will never change. So if I have good changes of direction, that's what determines the quality and the size of the tree. So if my first bend is 6 inches, then that means that my tree is maybe going to be 12 or 18 inches tall if that's where my first bend is. But if the first bend is short, if it's only an inch or two, then I have a chance to make that a shohin tree. So the changes in direction determine the size. So I can grow the diameter if I need to, but I need this change of direction first. So can you get ahead? So trunk diameter is really years, right? So the larger the trunk diameter, the more years you save. So if you can air layer something bigger and that's what you desire, you may want something long and slender and skinny. So I'm not saying which is better, but if you want that bigger diameter, yes, it's better, but you want to air layer right below, make your air layer right below another branch so that you can then cut it back and get that movement going in that branch. And then the larger diameter will serve you. But if you air layer and you have this much space, well, that means that you're trying to create a tree that's this big.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will make sense.
I've got a couple tree specific things. One asked about an oak, have you air layered oak tree? And one
I have
asked about air layering on or at a burl.
uh, so air laying on a burl, um, it's telling you it's going to produce tissue, but will it produce roots? That I'm not sure, and it may depend on the type of tree that it is. So I think that it's more dependent on the type of tree that it is rather than whether it's a burl or not. And then the first question was
Oaks.
oaks.
Air layer on oaks.
I never tried oaks. I've never seen any that I know of, but I wouldn't necessarily know something was an air layer unless somebody told me or it was obvious for some reason. I don't see hardly any oaks up here. I have a Gary oak or Oregon white oak that's a shohin that's fabulous and it backbuds really well. But I don't see too many oaks because the ones up here are really hard to collect and keep alive. So I don't know about air layering. But they would be a good subject because collected oaks up here often have reverse taper, almost always. So a great candidate for air layering.
Interesting. Uh, I put your email in the chat for people if they want it. You can copy that down.
Okay.
It,
Yeah, I'll have to make a little flyer with the different shirts on. So
that'd be cool. Yeah. I didn't see him at the expo. I guess I missed out.
I think not enough people saw them at the expo.
No, bummer.
With trees, everybody kind of walked right on by me, but they were there.
When you eventually repot your air layers, do you make a point of removing all the sphagnum and bare rooting the tree, or do you leave the sphagnum around?
Excellent question. Um, It would depend on whether it will easily come apart and if I have vigorous roots. So if I have very fine roots and I don't have any thicker roots established, I will definitely leave the sphagnum in place. I don't think it really does any damage to the tree. I'm not, at that point, I'm not worried about is it going to rot the roots or anything. I need all the moisture I can get and I don't want to disturb those new fine roots. But if it's grown out very coarse roots, as my plum did, I mean, those roots were the size of a pencil in 1 year. That was incredible. So
Wow.
those I could easily pull the moss out, and I would do that. So that's one reason why I mentioned I haven't actually tried this, but chopping up the moss into a shorter segments will make it easier to pull out between those fine roots. But it also means it's harder to hold into place as you're putting the soil in. But I think the sphagnum is a fairly critical component for success because you really need to keep that moisture around the tree. I think I've tried it without the sphagnum and just trying to keep it watered and stuff, and it didn't really work very well.
I've got Darlene mentioned that Garth Shepard in Santa Cruz does lots of coastal oaks. He has ground air layered one because of the reverse taper, like you mentioned.
And
Um,
that's what
someone
I
else,
was in my mind is the coast live oaks and stuff. Those would probably air layer easier than the valley oaks.
okay. John is going to try air layering a burl oak tomorrow, so maybe we'll find out. Someone asked about can you air layer a fringe tree?
I'm not even sure what they're referring to.
It's a
So
shrub, I think. More.
yeah, and it might be more of a California species that we don't have here. If it's a shrub, I think your chances are very good.
Okay. All right. Any more questions, guys? I
I was
think
just gonna I was just gonna mention that lower water mobility species like say hornbeams, what was it? Well, beeches we know can work, but I was thinking of something else besides hornbeams. Some of those species might be a little more difficult because they don't move as much water.
here we go. In regards to Japanese maples, you mentioned waiting until the leaves have hardened. However, I've heard some people say wait until the buds are swelling. Can you give your thoughts on both?
Well, waiting till the buds are swelling is earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Waiting till the leaves have hardened off is later. I'm not saying that doing things at at the onset of budding, like when you would repot, is bad. But I think you're in a much better position because the tree is back in energy positive. It has its resources, it has its solar panels laid out, and now it can take that energy and put them back down into building roots. If you do it at bud swell, it's going to expend all this energy making new foliage when you really want it to expend the energy to make roots. So I think you're really fighting against yourself.
Makes sense. Um,
It may work. Uh, my thing on any bonsai technique is, can I make it work over and over? Can I teach it and make it reliable? So something may happen once, but can you do it 10 times out of 10?
well, I think that kind of wraps it up. You did a very nice job. Very good
Thank you.
job, Scott. It was a pleasure. And I think I've gotten the questions answered, getting thank yous, and
Cool.
now you can get your office back.
Yeah, yeah. It's all covered with soil and shavings and different things. So,
Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate your
sure,
time and all the preparation you've taken. It's well
you
done.
bet. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank. If I could figure out how to get my controls, I'll turn the camera on and say hi again.
Oh, Carol says it's an apple. I say definitely if it's an apple.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So, all right. Thank you very much, Scott.
Okay,
Thank you for your
bye-bye,
time.
everybody.
Take care. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
I will. Thank you.
Goodbye.